You know what is genuinely rare in modern England? Towns where the high street has not been gutted and replaced with a Greggs, a vape shop, and 3 empty units where something used to be. Towns where the pub has not been converted into luxury flats, where the butcher still writes prices on a chalkboard, where the post office is still the post office and not a counter inside a newsagent that closes whenever it feels like it. Towns where you can walk down the main street and recognise it from a photograph taken in 1974. Not because someone restored it, not because the council applied for heritage funding and installed interpretation boards, just because nobody got around to changing it. These towns exist in England right now. They are affordable by English standards. They function, and they have preserved something most people in this country genuinely believe has gone forever. The chain stores did not come. The developers lost interest. The ring roads bypassed them, and in being bypassed, they were saved. Stay until number 1, a town so completely unchanged that a BBC crew filmed it in 1973, returned in 2019, and used almost identical shots. The residents had not noticed anything was different. Number 12, Wigton, Cumbria. Population 5,500. Distance 16 miles from Carlisle. Median house price £11,000 to £75,000. Here is what makes Wigton genuinely different. The market town layout has not changed since the medieval market charter. The central marketplace is still the centre of everything. Not a car park, not a pedestrianised zone with removable bollards, but a functioning market space where people still trade on Tuesdays as they have traded for centuries. The high street has independent shops in the same family for 2 and 3 generations. A hardware store with stock arranged exactly as it was when decimal currency arrived. A family bakery with a queue before 8 AM. A newsagent that sells things newsagents used to sell. No traffic lights. Wednesday half-day closing still observed by certain businesses as if the legislation abolishing it simply never arrived. I spoke with a retired school teacher in her late 60s, born and raised in Wigton. She told me people from Carlisle visit and say it feels like going back in time. She takes that as a compliment, even though they probably do not mean it as one. The bakery her mother used still sells the same iced buns. Her grandchildren walk to school past the buildings she walked past as a child. Some things should not change, and here they did not have to. The trade-off is real. Limited employment beyond services. Young people leave for Carlisle and Manchester. Specialist shopping requires travel. The quiet that some find peaceful, others find suffocating. For retirees wanting affordable northern market town character without extreme isolation, Wigton delivers. A medieval market town the 21st century simply failed to reach. Number 11, Wenlock, Shropshire. Population 2,800. Distance 12 miles from Telford. Median house price £25,000 to £38,000. Here is what you need to understand about Wenlock. This town inspired the modern Olympic Games. Pierre de Coubertin visited in 1890, watched the Wenlock Olympian Games running continuously since 1850, and took the idea back to create the International Olympics. The town has been running those games every year since. That is not a festival revival. That is 174 years of unbroken continuity. The high street is black and white timbered buildings from the 15th century, standing beside Georgian stone frontages with no apology for the mixture. The Guildhall has been the Guildhall since 1540. The ironmonger sells screws loose from a bin and gives advice free from someone who actually knows things. The butcher still breaks down whole animals. I spoke with a man in his early 70s who retired from Birmingham and moved 11 years ago. He told me he spent 40 years in the second largest city in England and never once felt like he belonged to a place. Within 3 months in Wenlock, people knew his name, his order at the pub, and the fact that he had come from Birmingham. That level of attention used to bother him. Now he finds it completely reassuring. The trade-off is rising property prices as Birmingham and Manchester discover it, limited local employment, and heritage restrictions that frustrate some owners. For retirees wanting Shropshire character with genuine community life, Wenlock delivers. The town that invented the Olympics and has spent 170 years quietly pretending it did not. Number 10, Alston, Cumbria. Population £2,000. Distance 40 miles from both Carlisle and Newcastle. Median house price £13,000 to £22,000. Here is the thing about Alston. England's highest market town. Streets running at angles that defeat modern planning logic entirely. The South Tynedale Railway has been running narrow-gauge steam through the valley since 1976, when volunteers decided it should and refused to be told otherwise. It still runs because those volunteers, and the ones who followed them, refused to stop. The main street descends steeply from the market cross. Original shop fronts. Pennine stone buildings with nothing hiding what they are made from. A covered market still functioning on the days it always functioned. The character here is northern bluntness. People say what they mean. The pub is the pub. The hills are the hills. I spoke with a couple in their late 50s who moved from Leeds 8 years ago. Their friends asked what they would do up there. They said exactly what you do anywhere. You live, just at a pace that does not require constant management. The trade-off is genuine isolation. The A686 over the Pennines in January is not a road you take lightly. Medical services require significant travel. Winter closes roads. For remote workers wanting complete escape from southern England's pace, Alston delivers. England's highest market town, unchanged because the altitude kept the developers away. Number 9, Sandwich, Kent. Population 7,000. Distance 12 miles from Canterbury. Median house price £28,000, £42,000. Here is what makes Sandwich extraordinary. The medieval town walls are largely intact. Not fragments, not interpretation boards. Actual walls you can walk on. The Barbican Gate has been guarding the entrance since 1384. The Strand Street streetscape is considered one of the finest medieval streets in England. Timber-framed buildings leaning in directions their builders intended, and a few they did not. The quay is not a waterfront development with apartments and a gastropub. It is a quay where small boats still come and go. The town has a curfew bell rung every evening since the 14th century by a bellman who takes this entirely seriously. I spoke with a retired architect in her early 70s who moved from London 15 years ago. She told me every building in Sandwich tells you something honest about the time it was made. No pastiche, nothing built to look old. It is old because it is old, and nobody ever had the money or ambition to tear it down and start again. In her professional experience, that is rarer than it should be. The trade-off is Kent property prices, summer tourist pressure overwhelming the village scale, and London commuter influence reshaping the demographics. For retirees wanting medieval English character within a functioning community, Sandwich delivers. A walled medieval port that survived 5 centuries of development pressure by being too complicated to modernise. Number 8. Hebden Bridge, West Yorkshire. Population £4,500. Distance 20 miles from both Leeds and Manchester. Median house price £23,000, £38,000. Here is what Hebden Bridge actually is beneath the reputation. The mill town infrastructure is complete. Weaving sheds, canal warehouses, workers' terraces climbing valley sides at gradients that make you question Victorian ambition. The Rochdale Canal still runs through the centre, still navigable, still lined with original stone towpath. The White Lion has been a pub continuously since 1657 and shows no interest in becoming anything else. The town declined when manufacturing left. In declining, it preserved everything. Artists and writers arrived in the 1970s because the rents were nothing and the buildings were extraordinary. They were right about the buildings. There is a quality to light in a Pennine Valley that photographers know and struggle to explain. It has to do with the stone, the weather, and the way sun arrives late and leaves early between valley walls. Everything is slightly golden, even on days that are not. I talked to a woman in her early 60s who has lived there 32 years, arriving from Bristol as a 20-something with no particular plan. She found a flat above a former mill for £40 a week and never got around to leaving. The valley is still the valley, the canal is still the canal. The pub is still the same pub in every way that matters. The trade-off is a property market now driven by Leeds and Manchester escapees, genuine flooding risk. The valley has flooded significantly 3 times in recent memory, and summer visitors overwhelming the town scale. For remote workers wanting northern character with actual connectivity, Hebden Bridge delivers. A failed mill town that survived by failing at exactly the right moment. Number 7. Ludlow, Shropshire. Population 500. Distance 25 miles from Shrewsbury. Median house price £28,000, £45,000. Here is why Ludlow belongs in this conversation despite its size. The Norman castle has been a ruin since 1689 and looks precisely as a castle should after 330 years of it. The medieval street plan, 11 streets radiating from the marketplace as laid out in 1086, is still the street plan. No ring road punched through it. The plan worked and nobody improved it. Ludlow has more independent butchers, bakers, and food producers per head than almost anywhere in provincial England. They survived because chains could not get a foothold when the foothold was a medieval burgage plot with planning restrictions attached. The Feathers Hotel, a timbered building of such extraordinary decorative ambition, it looks like someone bet a Jacobean carpenter they could not overdo it, has been standing since 1619. I spoke with a retired food writer in his early 70s who moved from London 18 years ago. He told me that in Ludlow he understands where he is in England. The landscape is specific, the buildings are specific, the people are from somewhere specific, not from the general category of English town. He finds that specificity increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. The trade-off is that Ludlow is not undiscovered. The food festival brings crowds, property prices reflect desirability, and the independent scene that defines it requires money to maintain. For retirees wanting the finest small town in the Welsh Marches, Ludlow delivers. A Norman-planned town making the most of its medieval street plan for 900 years with no plans to stop. Number 6. Whitby, North Yorkshire. Population, £13,000. Distance, 47 miles from York. Median house price, £2,000, £32,000. Here is what Whitby actually is when separated from what tourists think it is. The East Cliff, the Old Town, is a complete Georgian and Victorian fishing port streetscape. The 199 steps to the Abbey are still the 199 steps. The Abbey ruin has been a ruin since Henry VIII and does not look like it is planning a restoration. The Old Town streets are too narrow for modern traffic by approximately 300 years of engineering standards and have no intention of widening. Fortune's kippers have been smoking herrings in the same smokehouse since 1872 using the same process. The fish market still operates. Local boats still bring catch in. The tidal harbour has the same quality of light that had Turner painting it repeatedly in the 1820s. I spoke with a fisherman in his mid-60s whose family has fished out of Whitby for 4 generations. He said the town gets called a tourist trap, and he understands why. But before 7 in the morning on the quayside, in the net lofts, in the old streets above where visitors do not go, that is the real Whitby. That is the Whitby that has not changed because it has nothing to do with visitors. It is simply where people live and work as they always have. The trade-off is tourist pressure hollowing out retail character, high property prices in the old town, and winter isolation when the visitor economy contracts. For retirees wanting a genuine northern fishing port with extraordinary landscape, Whitby delivers. A Georgian fishing port that Dracula made famous and that has been quietly ignoring that fame ever since. Number 5. Richmond, North Yorkshire. Population, £8,200. Distance, 45 miles from York. Median house price, £22,000, £36,000. Here is what makes Richmond genuinely unusual. The marketplace is the original Norman marketplace from 1071. Not a heritage recreation, the actual place where Normans established the market, cobbled surface original, market cross original, functioning every Saturday since. Richmond Castle's keep has stood at one end of that market square since 1071 and is still standing there. The Georgian Theatre Royal, built in 1788, is the most complete Georgian theatre in England. 200 seats, original raked seating, original paint, original stage machinery in the basement. It still performs. The actors stand where Edmund Kean stood. It has not been sympathetically restored into a heritage experience. It has been used continuously since 1788, which is an entirely different thing. I spoke with a retired army officer in his late 60s who has lived in Richmond for 23 years after leaving the service. He told me Richmond knew what it was without needing a branding exercise or a strategy document about its identity. It was a Norman market town in Swaledale. It had been that for 1,000 years. It intended to continue. The trade-off is distance from employment centres limiting who can realistically live there, summer tourist pressure on the marketplace, and a property market rising steadily as Dale's lifestyle becomes more sought after. For retirees wanting England's finest Norman market town with genuine independent retail, Richmond delivers. A 1,000-year-old marketplace still holding markets, overlooked by a castle that has been there since William the Conqueror decided this was the right spot. Number 4. Totnes, Devon. Population, 8,800. Distance, 24 miles from Exeter. Median house price, £32,000. 5. Here is what you need to understand about Totnes before dismissing it. Fore Street is the longest intact Elizabethan town street in England. The buildings lean on each other for structural support in ways planning permission would not permit today, and are showing no signs of stopping. The Butterwalk, a covered walkway created by first floors projecting over the pavement, has been keeping shoppers dry since the 17th century and remains more practically useful than anything modern urban design has produced. The East Gate still stands across Fore Street as it has stood since the 14th century, and traffic still passes through it because nobody widened the road to accommodate anything larger than a moderate lorry. The weekly market is genuinely independent. The River Dart still runs ferries to Dartmouth as it has run them for centuries. I spoke with a craftsman in his early 60s who has made furniture in a workshop at the edge of town for 26 years, having arrived from London in 1998 with a skill, some savings, and a feeling he needed somewhere with time in it. He told me what Totnes has is layering. 15 different periods of English history visible in a single glance down Fore Street. Nothing cleared away. Each century added its layer and left it. He finds it enormously sustaining to work inside. The trade-off is Devon prices driven by London and Bristol escapees, parking that frustrates residents, and summer tourist pressure on a town not designed for visitors. For craftspeople and retirees wanting Devon's finest medieval town character, Totnes delivers. England's longest intact Elizabethan high street, run through with 900 years of visible history and entirely indifferent to your opinion of it. Number 3. Stamford, Lincolnshire. Population 2,000. Distance 90 miles from London. Median house price £32,000, £52,000. Here is why Stamford ranks this high. In 1967, Stamford became the first town in England designated a conservation area. Not a single street, but the entire town, because the Ministry of Housing looked at it and could not find a precedent for how intact it was. 57 years later, the designation still holds. The limestone that gives Stamford its colour, warm honey at midday, amber at dusk, is the same Jurassic limestone quarried locally for every significant building. The town looks like it was made from the ground it stands on because it was. Chain stores requiring standard shopfront modifications cannot get planning permission. The result is a high street that looks like 1972 because in planning terms it still is. The George of Stamford has been an inn since 1597. Its gallows sign spans the entire width of the high street, a format standard in coaching inn days that Stamford simply never removed because it had no reason to. I spoke with a solicitor in her mid-60s who moved from London 12 years ago. She told me what Stamford does that almost nowhere else does is make the ordinary beautiful. The post office is in a Georgian building. The dentist is in a building with a fan light over the door. You cannot conduct daily life without being surrounded by things built with craft and care. She finds it impossible to imagine living anywhere without that now. The trade-off is property prices rising consistently as London professionals discover it, weekend visitor pressure and preservation restrictions frustrating some homeowners. For professionals relocating from London wanting quality of environment without sacrificing quality of life, Stamford delivers. England's first conservation area, unchanged since the Ministry of Housing ran out of superlatives in 1967. Number 2. Lavenham, Suffolk. Population 1,800. Distance 25 miles from Ipswich. Median house price £45,000, £7,000. Here is what makes Lavenham extraordinary beyond the obvious. The Wool Church, St Peter and St Paul, was built between 1486 and 1525 by wool merchants demonstrating that their wealth was serious. The result is a perpendicular Gothic church of cathedral quality standing in a village of 1,800 people, as a monument to a medieval economy that ended 500 years ago and a confidence that has not returned since. Approximately 340 listed buildings in a village of 1,800 people. These are not listed because they are important examples of period architecture. They are listed because they are intact, original, unrestored examples that survive because Lavenham's wool trade collapsed in the 16th century, removing the money that would have funded their demolition and replacement. Poverty preserved everything. The collapse of the trade saved the village. It is the same mechanism that preserved every town on this list. I spoke with a man in his early 70s who retired from a London architecture practice and has lived in a timber-framed house built in 1483 for 20 years. He told me the house maintains approximately 14 degrees throughout the year, regardless of external conditions. In winter, this is cold. In summer, it is a blessing. He has learned to live at the temperature of the 15th century and considers it acceptable. What he will not accept is people asking when he plans to modernise. The house is not a project. It has been where people lived for 540 years. He is just the current one. The trade-off is severe property prices now beyond most local earners, tourist pressure overwhelming village scale, and a community so small that social dynamics are intense and inescapable. For retirees with the means and conviction to live inside England's finest surviving medieval wool town, Lavenham delivers, a village that collapsed economically in 1570 and has been accidentally perfect ever since. Number 1. Ironbridge, Shropshire. Population, £3,800. Distance, 35 miles from Birmingham. Median house price, £22,000, £38,000. Here is why Ironbridge takes the top position. This is where the Industrial Revolution began. In 1709, Abraham Darby first smelted iron with coke in this gorge and changed the trajectory of human civilization. The Iron Bridge, the first iron bridge ever constructed, completed in 1779, is still standing across the River Severn, still its original colour, still carrying foot traffic as it has carried it for 245 years. A BBC documentary crew filmed here in 1973 and returned in 2019. They used almost identical shots. The industrial archaeology, the blast furnaces, the foundries, the workers' housing, the inclined planes that moved materials up the valley sides is not preserved in a museum. It is the actual environment. People live in houses built for Victorian ironworkers and look from their windows at the same gorge that those ironworkers looked at. The main street still has the scale of a working Victorian industrial community, not a tourist village, an industrial settlement that happened to survive. The pub has been serving ironworkers and their descendants since the foundries were operating. The fact that the foundries are now museums does not change the architecture of the pub or the character of who drinks in it. The gorge is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but the residents do not live in a UNESCO site the way they live in a museum. They live in a gorge that happens to be where the Industrial Revolution started, that happens to contain one of the finest iron bridges ever made, and that happens to look largely as it has looked for 200 years because the valley walls and the river made large-scale redevelopment geometrically inconvenient. I talked to a retired engineer in his early 70s whose grandfather worked in the last operating furnace before it closed in 1959. He was born in Ironbridge. He has lived here for 73 years. He told me that people come from all over the world to stand on the Iron Bridge and photograph where everything modern began. They go to the museums, they buy something from the gift shop and they leave. Then evening comes. The gorge goes quiet. The residents walk across the same bridge and look at the same river that Abraham Darby looked at in 1709. He crosses it on the way to the pub every Thursday. He has done so for 50 years. He does not think of it as anything other than the way home. That, he said, is what cannot be bought and cannot be manufactured, and what Ironbridge simply has because it never stopped being a place where people actually live their actual lives. Here is why Ironbridge beats every other entry. Unlike Lavenham, which requires serious money, Ironbridge is achievable for working professionals. Unlike Whitby, which is seasonal and remote, Ironbridge is 35 miles from Birmingham year-round. Unlike Stamford, preserved and beautiful but somewhat removed from authentic working life, Ironbridge is a community where people work and raise families in the landscape that built the modern world. The preservation is not accidental like Lavenham's, not mandated like Stamford's. It is geological and structural. The gorge is too steep, the river too central, the original infrastructure too substantial to replace cheaply. The place preserved itself because it was made from iron, and because iron, as Darby understood better than anyone, does not yield easily. A population of 3,800 means genuine community. The 7 museums support independent businesses. The gorge provides landscape of exceptional quality. The Iron Bridge provides a daily encounter with the moment that made the modern world. For retirees wanting heritage with genuine community at accessible prices. For families wanting children raised where history is the environment, not the curriculum. For remote workers wanting to escape Birmingham without losing connection to it. Ironbridge delivers everything. The gorge where the Industrial Revolution began, still looking like it did in 1973, still looking like it did in 1879, in some ways still looking like it did in 1779. Some places are preserved because they are rich enough to maintain themselves. Some are preserved because they are too poor to change. Ironbridge is preserved because it is made from the same iron that Abraham Darby proved could build anything, and nothing built from that material and that conviction yields to time without a fight. So there you have it. 12 English towns where the 1970s pace of life did not disappear. It moved to places the motorway network forgot, that chain stores could not be bothered to reach, and that developers could not find a planning argument for. Let me be completely honest about what living in any of these places actually requires. These towns are not preserved because anyone planned it. The inconveniences, the distances, the limited retail, the cold winters, the single bus on Tuesdays, the flooding in some, are precisely the mechanisms that kept them intact. Remove the inconveniences, and you remove the preservation. This life suits people exhausted by the performative version of English town life. The high streets full of the same 8 shops, the pub that became a dining experience, the village that became a commuter address. People who feel something real has been lost and are willing to accept what genuine alternatives cost. This life does not suit people needing constant stimulation, career advancement, specialist medical care within 5 minutes, or who romanticize an unchanged English town without having considered what the absence of a Waitrose actually means in January. The England your grandparents described did not disappear. It moved to the places most people stopped looking. These 12 towns prove it is still there, waiting for people who want it enough to accept what it costs. If you made it this far, subscribe for honest English lifestyle content that does not dress inconvenience up as charm. Comment which town surprised you most, or which one is exactly what you have been looking for without knowing what to call it. Like this, so the algorithm shows it to people genuinely seeking an alternative to modern England, rather than burying it under weekend break content. See you in the next one.